Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming. I'm wondering if any of you have ever had a crappy experience with a doctor. A lot of hands go up. That doesn't surprise me. I bet also that several of you have heard of Brenda Laurel. Brenda is presently chair of the graduate program in design at the California College of the Arts. Here she is with the covers of 3 books, which she either wrote or edited. And in the lower right-hand corner, that is her on the cover of a recent issue of Interactions magazine. She's a pretty prominent person in the field. Last fall, Brenda had to have surgery at the Stanford Medical Center. And though Brenda tweets infrequently, here's what she tweeted following the surgery. Unfortunately, Brenda's experience is not all that unusual in the world of patient experiences. After spending 2 days in the hospital last year with his young daughter who was undergoing a series of tests, Alder Yarrow, a former colleague of mine, blogged the following. Unfortunately, not everyone who has a terrible patient experience gets the luxury of being able to tweet and blog about it. Indeed, somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 people die each year in the US solely because of medical errors. Here are some additional numbers that are also troublesome. These from a commencement address at Harvard Medical School. And if that doesn't depress you, here are some more. These from the Department of Health and Human Services last year. The authors of that last report go on to say that to their amazement, it is as if the hospitals don't seem to give a damn about fixing things. Here, without a good segue, is a photo of a dog. Thought I'd lighten it up a little bit. Actually, this is a photo of a dog, the dog of Dr. Jay Parkinson. Last year, Jay's dog was found to be at death's door, which Jay learned after he took his sick dog to a veterinarian. What amazed Jay was the exemplary care that his dog received, and the exemplary manner in which the vet kept Jay informed of what was going on. This experience led Jay to reflect on the differences between healthcare provided by a vet compared to healthcare commonly experienced by people. And Jay concluded this. Now, why is this topic of interest to me? Why am I talking about this topic to you this morning? Back in January of 2009, I was meeting with a client in a restaurant in San Francisco when all of a sudden a shudder traveled through my entire body, leaving me unable to speak for a couple of minutes. Fortunately, my business partner was there with me to take over when I suddenly could not speak. But things began to get a little weird and got worse such that by April, I found myself flopping around on the floor having major semi-conscious seizures. Now, during this period of time, I could not control what words were coming out of my mouth, and I was quickly becoming barely functional. That is when the US healthcare system entered my life in a big way. And because of an immediate wild misdiagnosis, I almost lost my life. I've written about all of this in a blog entitled My Real Life Unnecessary Nightmare, which you are welcome to dive into, but note that some people have found the story to be too disturbing to read all the way through. Now that should guarantee a few readers, I think. Yes, I definitely agree with Jay Parkinson. The US healthcare system is unsafe and inhumane. Or to put it another way, the healthcare system is broken. This quote comes from the doctor who oversaw Medicare and Medicaid until December of this past year. Now, do you care about this? In my view, you need to care about this, because if you haven't yet had a bad experience with the healthcare system, chances are very good that you will. Why is the healthcare system broken? Well, there are lots of reasons, but here's a glimpse at a couple of the reasons that were responsible for my particular nightmare, reasons that tend not to receive the attention they deserve. A major problem is that doctors tend to be arrogant, bullying nurses and not listening to patients. Bullying leaves nurses afraid to even speak up when they see doctors make errors. And given that nurses are afraid to speak to doctors, it's not surprising that patients are often afraid as well. In an outstanding TED Talk, Stanford's Abraham Verghese reports evidence that patients tend or don't get to tell their story even when they try. Evidence exists that more than 2/3 of physicians treat adult patients as if they were children. Now, this kind of behavior is so common that even The Onion ran a story about it. Now, quoting from the story, can you read that? Can you read the small print? Okay. I'll let you read it. One of the best out there regarding patients as actual human beings. Very well put. Well, on a more serious note, in one of Dave Logan's 2 TED Talks, Dave described the stages that all groups of people, or tribes as he calls them, go through, and claims that a major problem with healthcare is that doctors have gotten stuck at stage 3 of 5 stages, a stage in which a tribe's members think that they are great and others are not, a stage during which tribe members talk in terms of I, me, and my, and think that others need to shut up and do what they say. And no, that is not another Onion story. That's an actual fact. In a TEDx talk of last year entitled Reinventing Physicians, Dr. Jeff DiNabio traced the series of reinventions that doctors underwent throughout history. Relatively recently in that history, Jeff proclaims that the following happened. And in another TEDx talk, Dr. Brian Goldman describes how doctors work in a culture of denial and shame. Here are a few of his specific words from that talk. As Brian argues, if you can't admit to your mistakes, you can't learn from them. And here's some words of explanation from Dr. Jay Parkinson. Yes, the same guy who had the dog that I showed you earlier. And some additional words from Jay's TEDx talk. Now, while most discussions about fixing the broken healthcare system focus on such things as lowering costs and changing what insurance companies do, what is needed perhaps even more to truly fix the healthcare system is to transform the healthcare system's culture. A number of things are being done in attempts to accomplish such a transformation, including training students in medical school how to listen and screening applicants based on the extent to which they already have that key skill. There's also a growing e-patient movement where the E stands for empowered and engaged, and there are a growing number of online patient communities via which people are able to share vital information about diagnoses and treatments. A few other things are being done as well, but so much more is needed, and you can and you need to play a role. Designers have done quite a lot of work in the field of healthcare, but much of it at the level of the user interface, rather than at the core of what is wrong with the system. There are healthcare apps galore now, some of which designers have worked on, but I tend to share Jeff DiNabio's view about them. More recent estimates, that tweet is from November of last year. More recent estimates is that there now are a neighborhood of 18,000 medical labs out there. My advice to you is this. Look at and learn from the big picture of what is wrong with our healthcare system, and resist getting involved in work that might amount to little more than putting lipstick on a big healthcare pig. All of you have much to offer to turn this pig into a different and more attractive metaphor. As Cassie McDonald tweeted, the healthcare industry needs to hire designers and let them do what they're good at. Designers need to care. Yes, indeed, designers need to care. You can learn much more about this via reading a long piece on my blog. Also, there's an article coming out this coming week in UX Magazine about this stuff. And I tweet a lot about it as well, so you can follow me on Twitter. And that is it. Thank you. And that went much faster than I thought it was going to go. Questions?
Well, maybe Richard, I think healthcare is really in the news quite a bit right now. We know it's a matter of concern, and it seems like a great dark black hole.
That's a good way to describe it.
Without solutions, have you seen anything that gives you cause for hope?
Well, I think actually I made a reference to, just a very quick reference to the e-patient movement, which I think can play a very big role. So a growing number of people, unfortunately not until they become sick, begin to realize that they need to understand what is going on in their life and what is going on inside their body so that they can play a role of a partner in addressing their ills. That I think is a very sort of a bottom-up kind of movement because doctors are resisting it dramatically. But I do think that it's gradually gaining momentum and will have a big impact upon the healthcare system. Again, on parts of the healthcare system that people don't tend to think about, and that is the nature of the culture of medicine. Question back there, I think I saw a hand. Yeah.
I guess just looking at this talk, I'm kind of glad to be Canadian, but I think the problem's there too, for sure. And I'm just wondering if a designer did lend their sort of eye to this problem. I think designers are really good at focusing on one issue and sort of making a beautiful experience and carving out a little tiny niche, like you're saying, that doesn't address the bigger system. And I'm wondering if you could paint a trajectory on how a designer would go about trying to design the system. It seems like an incredibly big challenge, and I think what designers are good at is not taking on big challenges and focusing on something achievable.
Well, I think that may be true simply because of the nature of the workplace and the role that designers tend to be given. I think there are a number of efforts that are trying to expand the role of designers in the workplace, such as what was the recent Global Service Design Jam, via which you can actually get in there and begin to tackle these kinds of problems head on. A good trajectory, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that question, unfortunately. I wish I did. Yeah.
So I guess I just have a comment and maybe a question or a request. I used to work as a management consultant for, believe it or not, hospital and health organizations.
Yeah.
I really am relating to what you're saying a lot. And a lot of what I used to do was actually sit in on different departments like labor and delivery and just do pure observational research to understand kind of the consumer experience as they came into those different departments. And so just sort of, related to your question, do you think you could speak a little to perhaps your experience with user experience and consumer experience and the relationship that might have to, creating real change in the medical system?
Well, to the extent that user experience personnel, to the extent that designers do observe, as you did, that's, I think, critical. Observation of what actually goes on in the medical workplace is pretty key. So I'm not sure that I understand your question.
Well, I guess my question is, what else, is there a toolbox or a repertoire of techniques, something that designers could do to come into a system to better understand it?
Well, I would say you made a reference to a key one, observational research. But I think all the tools and techniques that many designers have need to be employed. So I don't think it's that unique of a situation. It's just a very big situation and takes a lot of time to address. Anything else? Yeah, over here.
I have probably not a question, but an answer to I guess your question.
Oh, good.
How designers can help.
Mm-hmm.
So for myself, as I have been in the same field, and a lot of schools right now train designers at not making things pretty. Like there's a huge misconception like designers make things pretty, solve small issues, but they have a bigger vision to solve bigger challenges. Rather than solving the tiny problem, look at what's the root of the problem and try to solve from there. So we have a lot of challenges in school, and lots of schools like training designers these days
Yeah.
for solving the problems than making things pretty is another thing. But like how you see things differently and
Yeah.
changing stuff. I think a lot of designers coming out, like for example, PPA has huge design problem issues, they solve it. So I'm sure designers can help some or other way to solve the needs.
Yeah, I really think the tools of the designers all possess are just as applicable to dealing with healthcare as anything else. But there are efforts such as, have any of you heard of John Kolko? He is head of the Austin Center for Design, where he has a one-year program where people can enlist, become a part of, that focuses on becoming a social entrepreneur. And there he's focusing very much on social issues and really taking all the tools, but still he's just taking the tools that are pretty common that designers have, but applying them to the social context. So if you're interested in really diving in that kind of a way, make sure you take a look at the Austin Center for Design. Yeah?
I agree that healthcare could use a lot of designers. Are there any healthcare systems that you've seen that are employing designers in a fashion that we can go in and make systematic changes?
The Mayo Clinic has a number of user experience designers that seem to be having an impact. The Mayo Clinic seems to be on the edge of making sure that the patient experience, or trying to make sure that the patient experience is what they can be proud of. So the Mayo Clinic is perhaps, I think, one of the leading places where things are done pretty well. But still, they have some challenges there. I've talked to the director of user experience there, and all of these problems that I made a reference to are very much a problem there, but they're working on it. Yeah.
Yes, and to add to that, I think the Kaiser Garfield Health Center,
Yeah.
they are doing a great work of understanding what the problem is, and in a small way they are making a difference in that field. So.
Yeah, there's a great innovation center at Kaiser Permanente in Oakland, and they're doing a lot of good work. Not really, well, I don't know everything that they're doing, so I won't comment further, but that's a very good, they definitely employ the tools of design very effectively there. Yeah, in the back.
It sounds like you've done a lot of research on this. I was wondering if you knew anything about what happened to Google Health, which was this pilot program that was a few years old and getting killed. And I think, I'm not sure what failure was in that, but I believe the piece they were trying to tackle was democratizing access to health medical records. And
Yeah.
Which currently I think is part of the problem where I think a lot of people see it as a black box, kind of they don't know what's in there, and they don't know what gets transferred from one healthcare practitioner to another.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had looked into that.
Yeah, there is a major problem with handoffs. Handoffs are another of the reasons that so many mistakes happen. Google Health died because it wasn't being used very much. It wasn't really integrated into the system as a whole. So I almost had a chance to work on Google Health, but I unfortunately did not. Had I would have had a lengthy answer to share with you. But again, I think the key reason was that it just wasn't popular. People were not using it. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that it wasn't integrated into the system. Mike? Oh, good.
But it seems like before we get around to fixing the problem, the medical problem, we have to fix the problem inside our own community. So every few months or so, we get around to paying lip service to the idea of designing for service or for infrastructure, for education, and then somebody shows up with $1 billion to make photo filters and digital farms, and we all work
Who?
towards that. And this particular problem, which is incredibly important, is also incredibly hard to get your 10x back from. So nobody's going to make a ton of money on it, so nobody's going to touch it. So how do we solve the problem, especially in this part of the country, which is focused on, tackling things that you can flip? How do you make designers care about something like this? And I agree that it needs to happen. And maybe this is a very cynical view, but where our community is right now, there are times I wish we had one neck.
I'm not sure what that one means.
How do we get designers to think about our role in society and how to better it?
Well, perhaps it's a multi-stage process. Of course, for quite some time now, attempts have been made to have design play a much more strategic role out in the companies in which they work. And progress, I think, is being made there. I think once the designers find that they are permitted to play such a role within companies, then things will just sort of balloon from there, because hospitals, medicine, I mean, it's a collection of companies. They can play those kinds of roles in those organizations as well. So it is a depressing topic, but it's an important one. It changed my motivation anyway. So here's the answer. Everybody just needs to become sick, and then experience the healthcare system like I experienced it, and you'll want to do everything you can to change it. A hand over here in the back.
I just wanted to revisit what these ladies had questions about earlier about how designers can make a difference. There's this story about Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and they ran into this situation where there was an increasing number of deaths caused by infections, and they didn't know what to do about it. But everybody knew what the problem was. It was the basic antiseptic procedures that weren't being followed. So what happened was they pulled in these consultants, and what they did is they made every doctor put their hand in this petri dish. So the bacteria started growing in the shape of their hand. And what they did is, for every doctor, they would take a photo of the petri dish with their name on it and make it the screensaver for all the computers. So it's instant shame for whoever wasn't doing their job.
So shame people into doing the job properly.
It worked.
Hey, that wouldn't bother me at all, given the experiences that I've had. I'd be happy to shame some doctors into doing things right. Yes, in the back.
What's something that we could do today or tomorrow to, make some sort of benefit?
Well, I guess I would say learn about the e-patient movement. Learn about the Society for Participatory Medicine. Learn about what that is all about. Read about things which they offer. And become aware of the various online communities that are out there, because at some point in time it's very, very, very possible that you'll benefit from being able to access them. And to learn about them now, when you don't need them, will enable you to make use of them when you do. Yeah?
What are your thoughts on the quantified self movement?
I have mixed feelings about that. Certainly a lot of the apps that I made a reference to are about quantifying oneself. I think well, it's happening. It's getting bigger. Is that going to play a role in?
Explain the quantified self movement.
Do you want to go ahead?
It's basically like recording your daily activities, or like how far you walk, or like how the air quality where you are, and various things like your weight, like on a daily basis, and you can
Erica, who's preparing for a marathon, could talk a little bit about the quantified self movement, since she tweets about this pretty much every day. So. I think it's here to stay and will grow, and it could be a part of a revolution in healthcare. But the number of apps that are out there which actually contribute to that movement, some are just not in very good shape. Again, a part of it is the extent to which doctors will buy into using to efforts on the part of people to quantify themselves. A related problem to all of this is that doctors are not, as a whole, tend not to be big fans of the internet. They are way behind the curve in terms of making use of social media and the internet. And anything that's out there tends to be held with great suspicion by doctors, and that's yet another problem that exists in terms of turning things around. Another question?
Yeah, I'll address the quantified health thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I have satellites that track me on my stupid little runs. So I'm going to marathon. I think part of the problem is also what Mike was speaking to, is all these things are really, they're aimed at people who are basically healthy. Like, this is where all the money and the excitement is going. People who are basically healthy, who do these things for sort of peer support and, you know, and like bragging, like, oh, here's how far I ran, oh, I cut out carbs, here's how much I'm tweeting my weight from my scale. And so we're solving the easy problems, and we're solving the problems that have a really, that you get a lot of positive reinforcement from your peer group, who is probably also mostly healthy, mostly privileged. And the deeper problems are in the infrastructure, and they're not cool, and they're not sexy, and they're hard to explain. And I'd encourage everybody to look at TechCrunch. The investor, Avinash Khosla, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, wrote a great piece on doing these doctors or algorithms, which is interesting, but I agree with some of his premises, but not his conclusions, which are that we need to get people out of the equation, and I think that is not at all. We need the processes and the systems to provide support to cut down on mistakes, because these avoidable mistakes are a huge part of the problem. And also, Leah, oh God, Dave, last name? Reich. I was like, Leah Reich, is really interested in this. She's somebody who just graduated with her PhD, and she's with a focus on some of these health issues, and she wrote a response that was good, and there are a lot of really good responses. So if you go to TechCrunch and look for the article, Do We Need Doctors or Algorithms? I think that's a great, I think he's wrong, but in a useful way. Because I think that's a fundamental, the fundamental issue is a question of incentives. Like, how do we get people to care about things that are, you know, depressing to talk about and hard and complicated, and not like, yay, Fitbit.
Yeah. As you can see, you may have noticed the quote from one of the quotes from Jay Parkinson, talking about already doctors tend to treat patients with algorithms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's not. We need more
Yeah.
humans. I think this is part of the user experience community. Is like the humans plus the technology is good, but if you start thinking like, oh, how do we replace? That sensibility and that feeling. That's not a good path.
Yeah, and given, as I agree with Erica, that given that most of these apps are made for the healthy, well, it's still a big gap there to fill. Questions? Another question? Yeah.
So I've absolutely terrible health and have my entire life, and I've been fortunate to come across some amazing doctors, as well as come across some terrible doctors.
Yeah.
Rhode Island was one of the bigger offenders on the terrible scale.
Mm.
But something that really strikes me about this, what you're presenting here, is it seems that, at least in the beginning of your speech, you kind of brag on doctors a bit and say, you know, they have this arrogance to them and whatnot, but the problem that you're addressing seems so much broader. It seems that it's almost a systemic problem, where we have problems with the healthcare system and how it operates, and how the information is shared across places. I mean, at one point with my whole health experience, I was about to head over to the Mayo Clinic, and something that really just struck me as difficult was how separated all of these doctors' information on my existence was.
Yeah.
It seems that one of the problems with all this, at least, is almost the structure that we've created through the law, as he mentions here, and patient rights and whatnot, that it becomes really difficult to diagnose a specific problem and solve it without running over red tape or treading on a million other problems that exist in the healthcare system. And I just was curious your thoughts on the actual system as it exists outside of just the doctors, but how it exists in the interaction of these individual pieces fitting together.
Yeah, I focused largely on the doctors and their culture simply because that was one of the key things that really almost did me in. But there are multiple other reasons for us to be concerned about the medical system, and you're referring to them. Handoffs are a huge problem. The fact that tests are repeated because different doctors don't have access to your information. Hopefully the health records systems will, electronic health record systems will take care of some of that. But there are lots and lots of problems. Here I wanted to focus simply on a problem that tends not to be talked about enough, that will plague the system no matter what else you do. This problem needs to be addressed head on as well. Yeah.
The follow-up question to that was, do you think that perhaps the system that we're essentially stuck in, for lack of a better term, is created by does the system essentially create the arrogance in the doctors and the doctors trying to cover their own hides, or is it that this is something from the institution of school that's then imposed upon the system itself? Like, where do you think the root of this disconnect lies?
I think it has multiple roots, if I can cheat and answer that way. Well, as Jay Parkinson himself made a reference to, the nature of medical education and residency is such that it yields these kinds of people, but it also may be that a lot of people who like who like to have this sort of God complex enter the medical field. So it's a mix of things. It's not all straightforward and clear. Yeah, way back there.
I had the pleasure of working on a project with physicians, and it was a website and a book, and so we actually were in a lab with physicians with a one-way mirror, and they were in the observation room, and they were watching patients interact with these materials.
Oh, good.
It was fascinating to watch the patients react to the materials the physicians react to the materials and say, patients aren't going to understand this. Whether they were older doctors or younger doctors, they had this perception about what patients were like that was really based on their experience with a patient in an exam room. So they had lots and lots of time with patients, but it was always in this kind of weird context, right, of being in a hospital or of being in an exam room. And when we pushed ahead and showed the patients the materials that we thought would be helpful to them, and the doctors watched the patients react very positively to things that the doctors Stanford doctors were absolutely certain they would never understand, appreciate, want, be interested in, and be shocked. Now, we can't really force doctors to go into rooms like that and watch patients in other contexts, but it seemed like that empathy thing is something that we, through research, can bring to physicians. And maybe the way to do it is not when they're practicing, but in the education system to help teach them some of the methods that we might use to create personas, for example.
Yeah.
Because no physician that's been practicing for 20 years is going to want to come to a lab, stick their hand in something, or come into a lab and watch themselves be proven wrong about what they know about patients.
Yeah.
Just as we were talking, I wonder if you have any thoughts about if there's a chink in making progress here, if it's about getting designers or people who understand experience and how to teach empathy into the education system of physicians.
Yeah, there are some efforts that are underway which I made a reference to here, on training medical students to learn to start listening, to counter some of those other forces that are influencing medical students during their education. So some of that kind of thing is actually being attempted in various schools. I do not know what kind of effect it has had as of yet, but these are relatively new programs.
It seems like it could be kind of judo, like system judo, where if the doctors are the ones in charge and everybody's scared of the doctors and everybody's doing what the doctors tell them to do, then if we could convince the doctors when they're still in a convincible stage of life,
Yeah.
that maybe they could be the ones driving the change in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be wonderful. Yeah?
So I'm one student in the design strategy,
Yeah.
BA here, and we are studying this, and we read the book called Designing for Growth, which had a very good case study on the Kaiser Permanente, case.
Mm-hmm.
So, we do in-depth research on what the problem is, and ethnographic research, which helps us understand and journey map both the patient, the nurses, the doctors, and from that you get archetypes, which helps you actually empathize and understand where a person is.
Sure.
To understand the problem first and then come with a solution. So I can understand what she's talking about because I'm in my first year right now, and it's very exciting what we're doing.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I was out there at CCA not too long ago where you had a design charrette focused on trying to address a lot of problems with the medical system, and so I'm very pleased about what's going on at CCA. Yeah.
I have very little knowledge of the medical system itself, of at least how the education works, just through some friends that study medicine. But it seems to me that some of the comments that you guys are making about empathy speak very much to what design is and how the medical system actually is being formed. A lot of the work that designers do is about understanding how people actually behave and have a very deep understanding of that relationship with what we create and how the users are going to utilize it. So there's a lot of empathy. However, I do think that the education system for medicine doesn't put the same emphasis in that because doctors generally try to disengage themselves from the user that we would consider user, and I think maybe that is a big point of maybe something that needs to change, but I see that big difference of how we will approach an experience from a user and how a doctor will approach an experience from a point of view where they have to treat a patient without trying to really emphasize with them and really disengage themselves from that. And that probably speaks to some of the issues that we're seeing in regards to why some doctors or why the medical system does not seem to understand why patients don't have the best experience, and it might be because they're not being trained, and they're actually being trained to the opposite, to actually disengage themselves from patients.
Thank you for that comment. Any other comments or questions?
Addressing what you said about the education, I think it is important to get them young now, because we did some work, because there's not just the initial education, there's continuing education, and there are these organizations. We did some work for the American Academy of Ophthalmology,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to see some of this stuff in action because there was a branch of the organization that was a profit center for the membership organization that developed materials for the doctors to hand to patients, to improve compliance, to help them understand their, glaucoma or whatever other condition. And we sat down and talked to them, and they were a very insular group because they were really protecting, we sell these materials on us. And I talked to them about their review process for these materials. And I said, well, the doctors review the materials. I said, well, do you show them to patients to make sure the patients can understand what's written in them? And they're like, no. And so it's like the doctor's guessing what would be at a level the patient could understand. And so the writing, of course, from a patient perspective, and we've done a lot of weirdly done a lot of eye health work.
Yeah.
So we probably know a lot more about the function of the eyeball than most design studios. But we'd read these, and it was like an incoherent mix of oversimplifications and medical jargon, and just never thought. They thought, well, it needs to pass muster for whatever the doctors assume the patients are interested in knowing and need to know and will benefit from. And maybe this was a few years ago, maybe that's changed, but probably not, because this organization was, it's kind of like The Wire, like the institution just crushes the individual's, desire to innovate or to serve people differently because there were certain incentives in place.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a big depressing problem, but that's a lot of opportunity, I think, for designers who really want to fight their way into it.
Yeah, it's a huge area of opportunity for designers. Yes, anything else? Yeah.
I just wanted to know briefly why you think a pet hospital is so much better. Like what is it about pets?
Well, it wasn't me who thought the pet hospital was so much better. It was Dr. J. Parkinson. And he thought it was so much better because, well, he actually attributed it largely to the fact that it all came out of it, that he had to pay via cash, that the vet cared more about the experience because of that. And indeed, the experience was so much better than he had ever had as a patient, and than he had seen everybody else have as patients with other doctors. So yeah, it wasn't my story, but definitely it's a very different world than tends to be the case for human patients.
So maybe the thing that we can do tomorrow is tip our doctors.
Yeah.
There we go. That would be interesting. Anything else? All done? Okay, great. Thank you so much.